listeners, to yet another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper knowledge of the universe and yourself. Back again with another episode. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
And again, for part 3 here, we are joined again by Susan Renee to conclude this 3-part series of the allegorical breakdown of the film The Dark Crystal. We're having a lot of fun so far with this, digging deep into the symbolism, and such a great movie to start with, you know, just so rich with meaning and kind of allegory. So you guys have anything you want to say before we start?
I'm just excited to kind of get to wrap this one up and everything, because it's been fun to dive into the movie, and, eventually, everybody enjoyed this. Make sure you go ahead and, click the like button and subscribe too. And eventually we'll be getting into the new Dark Crystal series as well, which, that'll be very exciting as well, because what they really did with the series is they took the movie and went so much deeper with it. So, but I'm excited to get back into it. So last time we kind of, left off with Jin getting to the castle, and we talked about, him entering the castle. He kind of enters like at the base in this kind of underground cave, and we were talking about the symbolism of the unconscious mind with that. And then, he encounters some trials down there. There was the scene where, everything kind of gets crashed in on him. And then there's this separation of the masculine and feminine. And, those were kind of the things we covered in the last episode. And then we left it off at the part where Jin is getting ready to start ascending, so that's kind of where we're at, and then we're going from here in this one. So do you guys want to dive into it from there?
Yeah, totally. So the next point to get back onto the timeline here is that the mystics have actually been traveling this whole time in the movie on their way to the Crystal Castle, and now they've actually arrived. So you see them approaching it, and of course there are some Gartham at the gateway or at the entrance, and as they get close, they start kind of coming to and getting all worked up like they're about to attack. And then right then they all the mystics, they start doing that chant where they go oh like that, and the Gartham just like freeze, and then it just puts them to sleep. So to me, this is kind of it indicates a command over natural law and using the power of your voice, and especially speaking truth, that you're shutting down the programming, again, the mind control. And natural law and truth is absolute, and it's perfect and immutable. So again, the Gartham seem to represent the order followers. So they're about to do something to attack them, and that use of sound and vibration and sort of speaking the language of the universe, so to speak, instantly shut them down and kind of rendered them inert.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very, a couple interesting things here to note is that when the mystics are encountering this threat, it kind of shows the different ways a person could go about encountering a threat. For example, like if a person encounters a worry follower or someone physically threatening them, most people's instinct would be to physically respond back with that. But you see the mystics, they use that power of that knowledge that they possess of cosmic law and of sound, of that speech, symbolically to do it. And it really shows you that there's different ways a battle can be fought. And a battle doesn't have to be physically fought to be won. You can win it with your speech, your communication, your words, like that. And that's really the easiest way to do it, because instead of them having to battle these Gothram, these order followers, they instead just like move aside, and then the mystics continue past. And I also think it's really interesting to note, like you said, the mystics have been traveling this whole time, and you kind of see this as everything plays out in the movie here. Their timing is literally like perfect. You kind of see through the movie they move very slowly, like they're just kind of at this steady little grind, and then but in the end, like the timing is just perfect in the way that they show up for it. So it's kind of interesting to note how that plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with the points that you both made. And I kind of saw that chant or that oming sound, which, you know, as we know, the om is what they say, the sound of creation. And I thought of that as part of the Song of Thra. And even though the Garthim are order followers, they are a part of that. And because Thra, the heart of Thra is truth, then it makes sense that even, you know, those that have been corrupted must, and to me, I saw they kind of bowed their heads in respect and reverence. I didn't really think of it as they went to sleep, but now that Logan has pointed that out, I kind of do think that maybe that was more what it was, because they did just kind of shut down. But I feel that song, as you put it, that, you know, resonance and that truth within that could not be ignored. And they had full confidence that they could handle anything that was, you know, going to meet them at the gate. So that was a very good scene.
Yeah, I like your take on that too, that it could be perceived as them almost sort of bowing their head to the truth, like just like getting out of the way, basically, because those mystics are following their orlog. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So
well, and I like your association with that that home sound that's like with the Song of Thra. That's a very, you know, I hadn't considered that before, but yeah, that's very interesting though, that by being able to get back to that same resonancy that even the order followers that had been twisted then, you know, bow their heads in reverence, or, you know, simply, you know, step aside. So that's definitely a good point for sure.
Yeah, it changed their vibration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could almost sort of lend itself to that feedback loop of correspondence, where we can influence the universe, but of course the universe influences us back too. So it's always that gabo, that in and out, that masculine and feminine transfer of energy that play. So yeah, up next, Jen enters the crystal room, the crystal chamber. And he, you know, that sort of upper level that's like a balcony overseeing it. He enters there very quietly, just as the Skeksis are now sort of coming down the hall. They're making their way in their own sort of ritualistic fashion. You know, the ritual master is leading, and they're all kind of, there's this way about how they're walking. And then, you know, they pass by, and you see Kira is trying to get up there too, but she's hiding in the shadow, letting them walk past. And she's sort of all colored, like the colors drain from her face, and she's got dark circles, and she just kind of looks a little bit like not her finest day, obviously, because she just got partially drained by the crystal. So she's in this weakened state. You know, and to revisit some of the themes that we've been carrying on through this entire series, the divine feminine is probably the most important archetype and symbol throughout this entire story. And here you see the feminine in a very like depleted state, but yet she's still in the fight. So I kind of like, for example, one way I could interpret that is modern feminism, because you know, it is very much taking on a very toxic feminine form currently, but there's still some who would also call themselves feminist, who truly desire and support equality. It's not about this shift in the power dynamics and subjugating men and all this kind of stuff. It's just wanting that true communion of equality. So, you know, in other words, the feminine is still in the fight, but it's a little bit like kind of in between worlds, if you will.
Well, and I think you know, you could also kind of look at it as, you know, that feminine, it's been captured and it's in a state of distress, and looking at it as in care, that, you know, the conjunctions coming up, like there's these major opportunities, but you can see that like care is something that could, you know, if it's in a state of distress, that definitely is leading to an issue, you know, that feminine energy not being in its healthiest form. So
exactly,
you know, that's something I think to note, that when these major events and things are coming up in our world, that care is almost always, you know, it's a very fragile thing. if you lose it, then, everything, all your chance of success and getting any of your work actually accomplished goes away. You have to have that carry that creative force. So I think it's interesting to note that they kind of introduce it in this kind of distressed state.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually reflected in the masculine within the crystal, if you think about it, because the crystal to me is very phallic. It's the crystal of truth. It holds knowledge. So it is, somewhat masculine in essence. And so if you think of the chamber, the crystal being the chamber, that's the feminine, right? And chamber is a very powerful word. It's to restrain or to lock away within. And even the verb of it would be to restrain, but the truth is literally in chains. The crystal is, chained up, as we see in some of the scenes, and the crystal is in distress as well. The masculine, the Skeksis are stealing energy through the crystal, and, we see that they're withering away as well. So it's curious to see the reflection of the feminine is in distress, is, drained, is depleted, and then the masculine, the crystal, is also in that same state.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
So then the Skeksis are taking their places in the crystal chamber. They're getting ready to do their sort of song and dance for the Great Conjunction beginning. And then Kira joins Jen up top. So, to me, it's like the Gelfling, masculine and feminine, are now reunited. So he's back in his power. He has the shard, he has the feminine, which is care, and Mother Agra is on her way back too, because she got freed after the animals, killed one of the Skeksis, and then her and Fizgig, two other, which I think are, kind of representing aspects of Jin, sort of these external manifestations of characters and how he's interacting with himself throughout this journey. So it's the great conjunction of the characters too. The mystics are there, Agra's and Fizgig are on their way back up. Jen, everything is coming back into alignment in every way, every aspect. So they're looking through this triangular opening in the top of the crystal room, which I think is really interesting, as the suns are showing, and they're real close together, but they haven't completely aligned yet. But this is obviously the symbol that you've been seeing throughout the entire show, with the triangle with the eye in it. Because if you look at the eye, there's three circles. There's the outside of the eyeball, then there's an inner circle that's the iris, and then the one inside that is the pupil. So it looks just like an eye, but it's actually the three suns aligning. And then, that triangle representing the triality of the masculine, the feminine, and then the union of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I like that you brought up that it's the conjunction of the characters as well, because you can really see that, that law of correspondence. Not only is it at the astrological conjunction, but the conjunction of the characters as well. So we see that, that as above, so below. So I really love how they incorporated that in there. That's definitely a good point to look at.
Mm-hmm. And so the Skeksis all start chanting, "Now we will live forever." And they just keep chanting that over and over. "We will live forever." Very ritualistic. And again, really displaying this obsession that the ruling elite have with their godlike status, their immortality, like just that they're untouchable in a way, even though they spent so much time being afraid of the Gelfling and trying to capture or kill or apprehend them because it would thwart their plans. And ironically, that's exactly what happens. Despite their hubris, despite them thinking, that they're gods, a little Gelfling in a crystal, a little shard, took it all down and completely changed the dynamic. So Fizgig, starts barking and freaking out to Kira. So there's the divine feminine is getting a ping from that sort of, what did you call it? The friendly beast. And it gets the attention of the Skeksis. So now they all look up and they see the two Gelfling there, and they're like freaking out, like, holy shit, the Krieg conjunction is upon us, and there's two Gelfling in the crystal chamber with the shard, like, oh, this is bad. This is really bad, you know.
Mhm.
You have anything, you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting that you brought up that, you know, the Skeksis, they're in this state of, you know, duality and being split within themselves, as we see, you know, reflected in being split from the mystics. But even in, like, they're in this state of cognitive dissonance, that, you know, they believe that they have all this hubris. They believe that they're all powerful and they're going to live forever, but yet they're also extremely afraid and terrified all the time, you know. So it's a very, you know, contradictory worldview that they have of themselves in that sense. And it's really like that they've gaslighted themselves. That's one thing I noticed with the Skeksis, that, and they really put this in the series a lot too, but if you look at their communication and the way they're interacting with each other throughout the whole thing, they're either gaslighting each other or trying to manipulate each other, or reinforcing, you know, like a false narrative. You
It's
know,
all
like,
fear-based.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
You know, and they just do whatever they need to elevate themselves and kind of keep that story that they've been telling themselves, that they're these all-powerful beings, going, when that really isn't the case at all.
And it's almost
Right.
as if they've forgotten who they were before, because they never acknowledge, oh, well, if this prophecy comes true, you know, we will actually be a more powerful being than we are now. It's as if they've forgotten their past, and they don't even know why they're afraid of it. They're just going through the motions.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
it's
a
kind of
great
like
point.
it's kind of like that fear of trauma, or the fear of healing, I should say, to a traumatized individual, because logically it doesn't make sense. Like, you're so messed up, so many people are in dire need of healing, yet that seems the thing that terrifies them the most, that it's like that's the thing that would help them the most, yet some people will literally do anything to keep from looking at themselves and like healing from that, basically. And you know, so the Skeksis are shrieking in fear of this possibility. And it's like Susan said last time, you know, they tried, the one Chamberlain tried to spin the story of just like, oh, well, we were just acting out of self-preservation. We were afraid that the Gelfling would destroy the Skeksis, when that wasn't actually what the prophecy was, literally. But it's very ironic, because that's their interpretation of it. In a way, there's a grain of truth to that, because they would not exist, they would not continue to exist as they currently are. They would transform into this new thing. And of
Right.
course, you know, ironically, that's what they're so afraid of.
They're clinging
To
to that
them-
toxic identity.
To them, it is like death. In fact, it's probably worse than
Right.
death.
Well, and it's, you know, it's also interesting to note that when the conjunction is happening, the potential for both outcomes is there. Like, you see the Skeksis there, they're performing their ritual, but then, you know, the Gelfling are, you know, Jin and Kira are also there with the shard, and it could go either way. And that's really, you know, interesting to note that when we look at, especially like major astrological events and things, there's a general energy that's there, but you never know how it's going to play out. Like we talked about in part one, I believe, with Mother Augra, you know, and she's she's speaking about it. She's like, just big change, sometimes good, sometimes bad. You know, the potential is there. So I think it's really interesting how they set that scene up of having the conjunction of all the characters, all these different potentials that are there. You're not really sure what exactly is going to happen.
And is that not natural law in a nutshell?
Right.
If this, then this. It's the future is unwritten. It's like if I input this behavior or this outcome happens, you know, this is going to be the result of that. And very much, you know, we're seeing that in the real world. This great precipice of, just like he said in the movie, heal and ascend or descend further into darkness and decay. And that's where we're at. If it's just very much this turning point where shit's down to the wire and it's about to go one way or another pretty damn soon. So they're shrieking in fear, and they summon the Garthim. Of course, they call upon their ordered followers to protect them and to to go get the Gelfling. And Jin is getting surrounded, so it's kind of like the pressure's on him to take action. It's like now or never. So he just runs and jumps and lands on top of the crystal, the dark crystal, but then immediately drops the shard and it falls to the floor. And now the Skeksis are really freaking out. And I was going to say this earlier, Brian, when you were talking about the way the Skeksis interact with each other, and they're always trying to like manipulate and deceive and push these false narratives that serve their own agenda. Doesn't that kind of relate to the dark crystal, the crystal of truth that has been perverted? Is that they're misusing the power of speech and information to corrupt and manipulate and exploit others.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of interesting. So the Emperor reaches down and he goes for the shard. It's right next to him, and then out of nowhere Fizzgig shows up and bites his hand and starts like attacking him. He's waving his hand like this, which to me was a very powerful moment, especially because rewatching this, and we had already discussed in part 2 this archetype of the friendly beast. Is Fizzgig is just this little ball of fur, yet if he hadn't have done that just that one moment alone could have changed the entire course and outcome of the whole movie, because if the Emperor had have actually grabbed the shard, it pretty much would have been over. So it was, he grabbed his hand, started biting it, and it bought Kira just enough time to fly down with her wings, or sort of hover down, and pick up the shard. So just that one moment, Brian and me, we've talked about just how a single act or a single moment or a single decision can literally change your entire life, or if not change the outcome or the fates of worlds, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting that the character they have do that is Fizzgig, this kind of friendly beast, and I think that's very interesting in the sense of kind of showing that it's Thra fighting back. Like when we saw, when all the animals freed themselves from the cages,
Mm-hmm.
and freed Mother Agora too, that it's the world waking up, that even nature is there to stand up in support against the Skeksis, because they have perverted it to such a point. So
Right.
it even stands up and starts to attack back, and I think that's interesting to note, in the sense of we see a lot of energetic shifts going on our planet currently that personally, like I definitely view as part of a cleansing and alchemical process, that just as we are cleansing as individuals, the earth is as well. And I think, we can see that in nature, that, even nature kind of starts to stand up and start pushing back in its own way against these archetypes of control. And I think that was symbolized really well in just the idea of Fizzgig coming up and biting, the Emperor's hand to keep him from getting the shard.
Susan, were you going to say something?
Well, not about the friendly beast archetype. I do think it is interesting that what you said about if that one moment had been different, and it's funny that, there's always these main character hero types in a movie, but this friendly beast, if you look back, is actually a really common theme, and they're kind of like the unsung heroes. But I did notice something about Jin landing on the crystal, and when he drops it, to me, that him taking that leap, that jump, was the courage, the masculine side of that. But then he dropped it because it would be way too easy for him to just have made this perfect landing and put the crystal in, and that was the end of the movie. But, he drops it, and it takes the sacrifice of the feminine in order to, that literally this trinity is happening right up until the end, the very end of the movie, like that need for both aspects to come together, all three aspects to come together to make this perfect conjunction.
Right. And you could also definitely say that Fizgig, sacrificed himself as well, because he took a risk biting the emperor's hand, and then the emperor ends up shaking him off and he falls down the shaft into the fiery pit below. So as far as at that moment, Fizgig died. He gave his life, or at the very least he was willing to give his life, because he did that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good point that you brought up there, Susan, too, in the sense that, if you think of Jen taking that leap of faith, so to speak, towards the truth, that sometimes we do have a little bit of failure, or, like we do drop the ball, so to speak. And that's part of that process, that it isn't always just this perfect landing. And in fact, it very rarely is. So
yeah,
that's
pretty
definitely
fitting,
very
actually.
interesting.
And then, Kira actually picks up the shard off the floor, and that freaks them out too, in which I think is symbolic. The Skeksis literally say, she has the shard, take it from her. Think about what we said that the shard represents, is that the boundaries, the thorazaj, the sense of self, or either knowledge of self or sovereignty itself. And what even more than men, do the elites not want to have? That is the feminine. That's why the feminine have been so subjugated, gaslighted, in every other way kept down, throughout history. It's because they fear that very thing. The divine feminine, in her power, in her fierceness, like we talked about before, that scares the utter shit out of them, because it's like that Kali that brings retribution for negative karma, which is exactly what they understand, and they're trying to avoid at all costs, because they're evil.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And so then they all start to surround her, and Jen is actually telling Kira, just give him the crystal. Like he cares so much about her. He's saying, don't risk your life for this. And she says, no, Jen, heal the crystal. And she throws it up to Jen, and then immediately gets stabbed in the back. So you see she's dying, and here, you really see the sacrifice happening, and the slaying of the feminine, which, you see this theme a lot too in, for example, like Trinity getting killed in the Matrix, and then Neo brings her back to life. So there's this sort of that archetype that's happening, which I think is pretty deep. You guys want to?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's interesting
Susan.
because we had to rewind it a couple of times, because it sounds like she says, no, Jen, feel the crystal. And we were like, is it feel or heal? And we had to listen to it a few times to see. And both of them I felt were applicable, because, she was saying, like, this is bigger than us, like no, heal the crystal, like everything that we've done up until now.
The truth is the all.
Exactly. This is the prophecy. We only have one chance. And I mean, really, they didn't have a whole lot to lose. They were the last two Gelfling, in existence. So that care definitely, went deeper with her sacrifice.
Well, and I think it's interesting that, they picked the feminine archetype as the one to sacrifice. You see that a lot with that kind of that divine, even kind of motherly energy that, like a mother will do absolutely like anything to defend her children, that there's that willingness to lay down one's life in order. And that's really an embodiment of care, that, if there was an act of care, being willing to lay down your life in order to accomplish something or to help someone else, that is definitely a very powerful act to do. So I think that's very interesting that they chose the feminine archetype to do that.
So then we see Jin. He's on top of the crystal of truth with the shard. He thinks Kira has been killed, and she's laying there on the floor, and everyone's just kind of looking, and he goes like this, and he just puts it right in the hole. And there's a huge flash of light, and it literally blows Jin, like, sends him flying off the crystal. And you know, everything begins to change. Like literally everything starts shifting. All the Garthim fall into pieces, like their heads fall off and each little section of their body, like their beetle armor, is just falling into piles. And the actual crystal, I'm sorry, the actual castle starts crumbling, but not to fall to be destroyed, but you actually see as bigger pieces are falling that it's revealing the castle is actually made of crystal underneath that. So it's almost like this, looking at the difference between stone and crystal. Technically crystal is stone, but stone is sort of a lot more dense and inert and kind of dead, whereas crystal is almost like a living type of rock. You know, it literally vibrates. It has a frequency to it,
and it's continually growing too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even the name Crystal has that sort of, you know, obviously we're not talking about Christianity, but the concepts where a lot of the, you know, the Christian doctrine has taken from this concept of Christ consciousness, which we've seen depicted in the shaft with Jen ascending towards the purple, the crown chakra. You know, that's essentially what that represents on an esoteric level, is an activated human being that has brought everything into balance, the left and right hemispheres, which is again the masculine and feminine. That seems to be what everything is pointing at in this movie. And you know, it's utterly chaos, perceived chaos, you could say, even though it's the beginning of the end where all things are actually put right. So everything is set right. To anyone just watching that part without context, that's what it looks like, chaos. The walls are literally crumbling. Yes, right. And it's that sort of order coming out of chaos that you know is coming. That in order for everything to come back into the alignment to create a new world, that old world must be destroyed, essentially. You know, it's like that quote that, you know, enlightenment is a destructive process, because it's not just this super nice, feel good, butterflies kind of thing. It's utter destruction of those aspects of who you think you are that you aren't. Those, you know, the old paradigms, the old beliefs, all that stuff, the trauma.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the Garthim were the first to crumble as well, because, you know, the order followers were the first to fall. If you have no morals, you essentially have no power.
Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting. One, what I thought was interesting is that you see them, you know, they're like crumbling in little pieces. You see that kind of happening if you look at a country whenever it's going through a time of like a lot of change. You'll see that their power structure, it doesn't just crumble in like this, and you know, it's kind of like in little pieces. You know, like this little area will start to go wrong, or you know, this group of order followers over here won't become as effective, or you know, they'll stop doing their job, or whatever it is. But it's this process of, you know, it's just all being torn apart. You know, a very you know, destructive process. You know, and that, you know, we see that obviously, you know, reflected in the ideas of alchemy. You know, in astrology, there's a lot of different, you know, chakras that are all, you know, symbolized by this kind of the storm. You know, in the tarot, there's, you know, the Tower card. You know, so this is a theme, this destructive kind of theme, in order for something new to be rebirthed out of it, that we see a lot. And I also thought it was really interesting that whenever Jin, you know, reunited the crystal, it was so powerful that, you know, it blew him back. You know, that's something that you could see that, you know, when you really step into full alignment with yourself and integrate it with truth, it's an experience that literally, like, you know, it like blows you back. Like you're not quite prepared for what that's going to bring, and that kind of like level of both destruction and rebirth that happens when you do that integration.
Right. I was literally blown away, you know,
that
sort of thing. It was a mind-blowing experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, even more based on what you were saying there, Brian, about the Garthim actually falling into pieces, is you can almost look at that as the fractured psyche as well, of the kind of person that it takes to take a job or a position like that, they're so fragmented within themselves that once truth is restored symbolically, who they think they are is going to literally crumble into pieces because there's no truth to it. There's no substance. It's just everything in this scene, all of the lies and the, you know, sickness and everything that the old world was built upon is literally just crumbling and falling away. But in its, you know, it's perceivably a bad, or, you know, like I said, chaos, but you know that inevitably it's actually bringing about something that's divine and wholesome. So
yeah, and you see that Jen and Kira don't run away from the situation, which obviously Kira can't run anywhere because she's dead or close to it. But as soon as Jen heals the crystal, his first priority is to go to her side, and he's holding her. And I thought it was interesting that, you know, in a real life situation, people would be like trying to get away, like, I don't know what's about to happen, but, you know, we're going to get out of here. But there was no fear, I think, because they knew that the prophecy had been fulfilled.
That's a good point. And, you know, Agra finds Fizgig hanging in the shaft and saves him. In fact, he's hanging on that reflector arm that they used to drain the podlings. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then Agra sticks out a pitchfork and saves him. And you know, again, that theme of death and rebirth, everything is crumbling. And then you actually see some of the podling slaves that were enslaved in the castle, their eyes go from that gray back to the sparkly, you know, black eyes that they had before. Like, it's like their soul essence was restored as well. So everything that was perverted and corrupted and everything else is now coming back into alignment, into balance. And you could also kind of see like the mind control was broken on them, because think about it. If it's their spirit that they're stealing, their essence is their spirit, well, you know, that's what breaks a slave. You have to break their spirit to break them. So that spirit is what gives them the fight, that you know, it's sort of that feminine, that essence, literally, you know, the etheric substance of the thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to note the balance being restored, as it said in the beginning, when everything was green and good, and then the divine mother coming along to save the bravery of nature, you know, and coming and rescuing Fizgig. It's that reward of the bravery, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It never struck me quite like that until you just said it, where the land was green and good. Well, green represents balance because it's the heart chakra. It's the center where everything else moves into from the bottom up and down to activate that you know, heart space there. And so yet another sort of allegorical reference to that balance of the way things were before, and now all is being restored. So we're seeing the world begin to, now that the death and destruction, the tower card scene is dwindling, now begins the actual reintegration. So this whole time while all that was happening, Jen has been holding Kira, like essentially holding her in his arms, and it's like he cares so much about her, he loves her, and you see tears in his eyes. And like Susan said, most people would have just run away to save themselves, but he just stayed right there and was trying to connect with that one part of him that he feels was taken from him, that loss. When everything else is being recombined, he's there kind of mourning the loss of that, or what he thinks is. And it's his care for Kira, you know, his love. It reminded me of that part in the Neverending Story when Atreyu is talking to the turtle, the giant turtle, and he's saying, well, why don't you care? If you do nothing, you know, you'll be destroyed too. The nothing is taking over everything. And he says, we don't even care that we don't care. So to me, this is being depicted because his love for Jin is like the love of care, or the care for care. You see, like, you have to love and cherish that as that, you know, the queen, the divine feminine is something that the masculine should inherently want to protect, because it's so delicate yet sacred and powerful all at the same time. You know, like you said, Brian, earlier, you said yourself, you know, that care is so fragile. And once you lose it, it can be difficult to get back, because how do you care if you don't care that you don't care? You know what I mean? Like, it's something, it has to be so inherent, intrinsic to your being that comes forth. It's like welling out of you. So light like shoots down from the sky into the crystal, and then from the crystal into the mystics, and then to the Skeksis. And this time the light beams are green. So
and the crystal is now clear again.
Right, crystal clear. Mm-hmm. And so you have that green light beams kind of indicating that completion, that balance again. And it's almost
the heart.
Like, right, if the crystal represents the all, then the light is going, you know, the light is truth and knowledge, is going from truth itself into the feminine, which is the mystics, and then into the Skeksis. So it's like truth, you know, into the feminine or intuition and emotion, and then to the logic. It's sort of that hierarchy that is in, you know, metaphysics, essentially, of the components of the self. And then they all start kind of becoming merged with each other. The mystics in between the Skeksis, but they're all facing away from the crystal. It's very interesting the way that they're oriented like this. Before I continue, you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, just that it's very interesting when all this, you know, destruction and kind of chaos is happening, that, you know, this mystics, that they step into the place within the ritual space in the chamber, like just right and perfect time for the conjunction. You know, it's like it was almost like it kind of got more perfect, their timing of how they came into all their proper places, and they all knew exactly where they were supposed to go, because unlike the Skeksis, who, you know, Susan had mentioned earlier, had forgotten who they were, that they were these other beings, the mystics still had that memory or that acknowledgement that they knew that they were fractured parts of the self, and that reintegration needed to happen, and they weren't fighting it, they were willingly moving towards it, you know.
Yeah, and it's interesting you noted that their backs were to the crystal, because the Skeksis always faced it, and the light was going in through their eyes, but it was going in through their backs, like in the heart space when they were receiving it. And as he said, it's the light, and then it's the mystic, and then the Skeksis, and the way that they line up with one another, it looks as though the mystics start standing up tall, and they're opening their chest, like they're receiving, because they're the feminine. And as Logan pointed out when we were talking about it earlier, the masculine is surrendering. The Skeksis are kind of just, they're not fighting it, they're allowing it to happen in that moment of reintegration. There's this transmutation of the heart and spirit through this experience, and the masculine is surrendering and the feminine is receiving.
Right.
Well, and that's interesting that, you know, the masculine has to be enveloped in the feminine, enveloped in care in order to be healed. You know?
Right, because it's almost like a reversal of, when you think of the masculine, it's that thrusting, penetrating, you know, action oriented, versus this, where it's kind of like, you know, to be like, to use an analogy, it's like letting the woman do the work. In other words, it's sort of submitting to that feminine that's just coming in, almost like, you know, spooning them from behind, like just wrapping them up, and they're sort of submitting to that, where the mystics look bigger and the Skeksis are all kind of like shrinking down as they're all like merging into each other. Really, really interesting, the orientation and stuff. And you could also kind of look at it as, you know, like you said, it's the open arms, the heart space all exposed and taking them in. It's like they're embracing their shadow self, you know, and merging as one, the moon and sun, you know, sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and that's, you know, it's interesting that, you know, they're coming back into alignment with themselves at the same time. The three suns, you know, three souls are coming into alignment. at the same time in the conjunction. So again, more of the law of correspondence being reflected there.
Yeah, that's true. Crystal, which is truth, the third, and then masculine and feminine.
I think that even the way that they look after the integration is interesting, because they're almost like these crystal trees. It's the whole as above, so below.
Yeah, and like the mystics look very blissful and just kind of like confident and just opening up. But if you look at the Skeksis, they're going about it, but they all look really scared. They're like, oh, like, kind of just backing into it. And then, right then, Augur and Fizgig, care and intuition, show up at that exact moment. So now everyone is fully conjoined in the crystal chamber. And then here you see the united beings, the united ones, as I call them, that very much have this sort of a Anunnaki look to them, like the gaunt face, the elongated head, and then they have sort of like Susan's backdrop, this sort of crystal tree looking stuff coming out of their head. And they're all white, just like the crystal, and long robes. And also definitely worth noting, they have these sun and moon symbols on their chest area, on their cloaks. As you can see in the screenshot, the moon is above and the sun below. Again, with that duality embodied there.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. There was a lot of symbols of balance. There's 8, which is infinity, of these creatures left. And as you said, the sun and the moon, the 3 moons, the 3 suns are represented in their cloaks. And so there's very much this, 2 become 1, balance has been restored theme. And Augur says, what is sundered and undone shall be whole, 2 become 1. As this is happening.
Well, and that's the first thing he says. And now the prophecy is fulfilled. We are again one. Many ages ago, in our arrogance and delusion, we shattered the pure crystal and our world split apart. This to me represents the lies, the deceit, the secrecy, the obfuscation of truth, even the misuse of truth through dark magic, essentially, using the powers of the occult to exploit and control people rather than to uplift humanity. It's truth that allows them to do that, because they have this knowledge of the universal laws that govern, magic, sorcery, all that stuff. But it's being used for ill content. So obviously it's a corruption of the truth, like the dark crystal.
Well, and I think it's interesting that, he says, many ages ago in our arrogance and delusion, we shattered the crystal, and fractured our world. To me, that really hits on, and this is getting back into ancient history, but at some point in our ancient past, the idea of other beings or some state of arrogance, allowing that to come in. Willingly, because we were arrogant, where there was something that we as a species, were seeking, and through that arrogance and delusion, that's really what led to that traumatization, that fractalization that sent our world, spinning off into chaos. I definitely think that's very much what that scene is hinting on, is that members of ancient councils and things, foolishly decided to, allow certain things to happen. And through those choices has led to, ages and ages of chaos. Sethicus Boza gets into a lot of great stuff like this. His segment, this 7-hour segment that he did on Thought recently, that was a really excellent segment that kind of got into this stuff really deeply. And that's a whole can of worms, but I think that's very much what this scene is really hinting on and explaining this, and especially what this being is saying. It really goes back to all of that. So, if you guys are interested in more of that, be sure to go check that out on his channel, Black Earth Productions.
It's called The Betrayal of Thoth.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
Very, very power packed. I mean, you could spend a year studying just that one segment alone. So, again, deviation from truth, natural law. And then he says, your courage and sacrifice have made us whole. That one line, I was like, whoa, I started scribbling notes right then, because not only is that sort of, we've seen that in this story with Jen, his courage to jump out there, even to go on the journey at all, but to jump out there and try to heal it. And then Kira gets killed by sacrificing herself. So to me, it struck me that courage and sacrifice is sort of the masculine and feminine expression of care, because in order to have courage, you need to care about doing the right thing. And then in order to to get the job done, you have to care enough to be willing to sacrifice, because it's like, I care about this thing, but I care about the right thing or truth or whatever it is more. So I'm willing to sacrifice that, let go of it. And so it's that surrender, that letting go, that sort of feminine component as well. Thought that was really, really profound, actually.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
And so, the shard going back into the crystal again was a very penetrating act, healing. So you could see the shard kind of as a masculine, and then the crystal of truth being the feminine, receiving the one back into the all, because it's like, the drops in the ocean, sort of an analogy of we're all drops in the ocean, but what is the ocean but a multitude of drops, to quote Cloud Atlas, one of my favorite movies as well, is you're seeing the reintegration of the one back into the all, which is ultimately kind of the purpose of the spiritual game, is source separated itself from itself in order to come back full circle and become whole again.
Mm-hmm. And then, after we see this, in beings, then we kind of see the scene here where it leads into Kira being healed, which I think is a very interesting event to happen, because, up until this point, you see Jin, and obviously he's kind of, still in a state of sadness and mourning, because he's holding Kira, thinking that, she has sacrificed herself and is essentially dead. So you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, well, he then immediately I don't know, there's no name for them in the movie, so I just call them the United Ones, or just the Anunnaki, just because that's what they look like. He looks to Jen and says, hold her to you, she is part of you, as we are all part of each other. So again, reinforcing that there's literally no difference, like she is an aspect of yourself, and you should care for her just as you care for yourself as well. And then, there's a sort of a singing, chanting, sounding music. It's hard to tell if that was part of the soundtrack or if the beings were doing it, but Kira was then revived and come to life, and he's embracing her there. And it's like that was the final thing that needed to be restored for everything to be kind of completed, right? Is, that polarity, or that duality, I should say, to them. They can live together in love, it doesn't have to be romantic love even. I don't think they ever really went there in the story. It's kind of ambiguous, right? It's they're friends, and you could see they would totally, do great together that way, but they never kissed or anything. I thought that was kind of interesting, because that's kind of rare for a story like that. The guy always gets the girl.
Right. Not to have that prince and princess archetype. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she definitely was never like the damsel in distress either. She was just as powerful a hero as he was.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like that too. She wasn't like this helpless, like, oh, they're trying to get me, what do I do? And then, of course, one of the, the final most powerful lines he says, and like I actually get choked up just thinking about it, because the words are so, it's not even that they're that eloquent, it's just that it's so powerfully true. And I feel that in my core. He says, now we leave you the crystal of truth. Make your world in its light. I mean, how beautiful to depict what we ought to be doing as a species. It just highlights the sickness of the world, how absolutely insane and unhealthy and unwell that we are, and what we do to each other. It's absolutely awful when we could literally be living in paradise right now by aligning ourselves to natural law, learning occult knowledge, and creating whatever we can possibly imagine, which a mind uncumbered by the chains of, slavery and indoctrination and every other thing. Just imagine the potential of what one person, let alone an entire planet of human beings that aren't tainted by that, and what we could accomplish through creation, the power of magic, essentially, without the game of egos at play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a very powerful line to kind of like lead the movie off with there, because it goes back to that potential. There's that unlimited potential for you to tap into, to use your magic to create whatever kind of a world you want, and that potential is truly unlocked when we have, we've all reintegrated back in alignment with ourselves. I think that's interesting that we see all these different beings become reintegrated, and then that potential's lost, and these beings that had been holding on to the power and misusing it finally realize that's not what they needed, and then give it back.
And
choose to
you also see the law of correspondence and mentalism at play with that with that statement. Now we leave you the crystal of truth. Make your world in its light. So your behavior and what you create should reflect that, correspond to that through what you know in your mind, and then through mentalism, you're creating that externally.
Yeah.
And then so finally, the united ones, they turn to the crystal. They become beams of green light, which there's that green again of that balance and brought into the center, and return to the stars, which again, very, symbolic of sort of that ancient aliens kind of thing. They came from the stars, then they return now that they've sort of helped humanity, or in this case, Thra and the Gelfling, level up and evolve to the level that they should be, and that's kind of, whether that's true or not, some say, or at least, according to the lore, that's what the aliens are doing here, is, keeping an eye on things, but trying to let us choose. And we could either choose to destroy ourselves, and that would just be a depiction of we're not ready for the next level, and that everything's moving in cycles and circles, and it's just like you just keep doing it and doing it again until you fucking get the lesson, and then you can move on, because without that sovereignty of the ability to fail, then you're stunted and you're not truly a sovereign, autonomous, or even like considered like a grown-up.
It's so funny that you said cycles and circles, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Was if we compare this to humanity, if we look back into ancient history, there were these rises and falls of civilizations, right? Where we had these peaks and these valleys. And that's kind of part of the story of Thra, is there's these trine and there's these conjunctions that happen. And there's actually, I've seen this theory about our own path of travel in the universe, like our orbit that we're on, and that there's these certain points that intersect these conjunctions that happen, and at each of those points we have had a rise of a civilization, and then there's this gradual decline that sometimes will end in like catastrophe, as we've seen with some of our ancient civilizations, like the ancient Egyptians and the Aztecs. There's not really a definitive reason why they rose and fall the way that they did. And that's reflected in these cycles of Thra. It's almost like they got a new start. And when it showed the scene of Jin and Kira together at the end, as he's saying, make your world in its light, I kind of got this Adam and Eve vibe of like this is they're literally the only two left. So they are getting to restart and they have this opportunity. And like Brian pointed out, it could go either way. And that's something that Augur is aware of too, that like this next 1,000 shrine, who knows what could happen, you know? It may not necessarily be a happily ever after. And that's what's so real and raw about this movie, is that it's got tragedy, it has bravery, it has heart, it has, you know, all of those elements of, you know, real life.
Right. Yeah. And that's something you can really tie it all together with too, because when they read the, you know, the prophecy, by Gelfling hand or else by none. In other words, like no one's coming to save you. You know, there's no, get out of the savior complex mentality. It was there. He says your courage and your, you know, sacrifice that saved you, and it was, you know, ultimately their choices that they did themselves, no one else, which I'd like to really contrast with, you know, the Christian mindset. They don't have either. You know, I'm not attacking Christians. I'm attacking the mindset of the belief system that they follow, where they have no courage. They beseech Sky Daddy, oh, give me this, or help me with this, or oh God, please help me, whatever. Total learned helplessness. And they have no sacrifice, because guess what? Jesus already died for us. He made the ultimate sacrifice. We're good. All we have to do,
rather than healing, we'll just ask for forgiveness. That's way easier.
Right, exactly.
It's
so
not
you can
really,
see
but
why that is such a inherently disempowered and disempowering path to follow. And you know, personally, I think that it's very much intentionally designed that way. And that's why it's the most, you know, popular, and especially if you look at all three Abrahamic religions, by far the most popular religions of the world. And, you know, it just ask yourself, who does that benefit, you know? Because they're waiting on the rapture. They ain't trying to save the world. They're just like, you know, even Christian truthers that know all about what they're doing, you know, the chemtrails and the Illuminati, whatever, they're just like, well, it's just a test of my faith. As long as I stay true to my God and my Savior, then he's going to come and save us, you know, the good ones. Everybody else will burn and all the Christians will go to heaven. But just because I believe, I mean, it's just, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
If there's no
But,
growth,
like
there's
said,
no lesson there.
Well, yeah, and like I said, it's just a fundamentally different mindset than what is being, you know, displayed here in the movie, of like having that courage and having that sacrifice and that willingness to be able to go and take that action yourself rather than look for something outside of it. So is there any last minute points you guys had that you can think of when we get in here?
Yeah. I mean, basically the movie ends with this last symbol of balance of the masculine and feminine, because the crystal is now clear and healed, and so is the chamber and the castle itself.
And the castle, and
exactly,
the whole castle is made
the male,
of
the female, and the
of
hall.
truth. So even that is kind of it's depicting the crystal. You know, we leave you the crystal, make the world in its light. Well, now even the castle itself is already reflecting that crystal clear, white, solid, pure aspect to the crystal.
And the land around the crystal was like very
It's
desolate,
green.
and it's now green and healed. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. With a river of water, by the way, which is very feminine.
Yeah. So,
I didn't notice that.
It's a really, really beautiful scene to end the movie on. So. Yeah, so, you know, we had a lot of fun doing this one, guys. So if you enjoyed it, you know, make sure you hit, you know, like and subscribe, you know, and, you know, comment below, you know, what were some of your takes from the movie, or some of your favorite scenes, and, you know, things that maybe we potentially missed. You know, what are some insights that you guys have? We definitely want to hear from you. You know, and then keep in mind to always, you know, go to thewizardfactory.com if you haven't yet. We have a free initiation package on there. You guys can download it, get some basic daily rituals and practices that you can get started with. And we also, you know, recently released our 9-world rune divination course, which we've been getting some really great feedback on from some people who already got it. So, you know, be sure to check that out on the website as well.
we're still running a limited time special where you're getting the free Phoenix package along with your purchase for that. So we'll put the link down below. Also, because I haven't announced or really talked about this as much, we do have t-shirts on the website. So if you like our logo or want to, support us or just rep the brand and help, a conversation starter, tell people about the podcast, good price on those. And I will put that link down below as well to our website for the t-shirts. So yeah, that's going to wrap up our very first allegorical breakdown. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did making it. And we'll definitely be making more content like this. So again, let us know what movies you'd like us to cover down below. And until then, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.